Thank you so much for being here today. I am really excited to have a chance to talk with you about hate, pop music, and politics. And I want to begin with this question. Do you listen for the politics in music? Because most people don't. Most people think about politics as what the government does, passing laws, running elections, implementing policies. And then in terms of citizens, people think about politics as self-interested, rational behavior, who gets what, when, where, and why. And then music is understood as entertainment. Its lyrics may communicate a message, but the sounds and the rhythms of music have an ambiguous meaning at best, may seem non-rational, and so how could this possibly be about politics? So what I want to suggest is that there are a lot of ways that music is used in politics. We've got campaign theme songs, protest marches, military marches, anthems, national anthems, and controversies about them. And that the things that may make music seem marginal in politics, its appeal to the emotions, its effects on the body, at least in terms of communicating an ideology and a message, are actually the things that make music most powerful in terms of mobilizing citizens. And coercive regimes have used music to manipulate citizens subconsciously to comply with their rule. And protest movements have used music to get their issues on the political agenda, to disrupt politics as normal, and to sometimes change norms, practices, and even whole societies. So not to think about the music in politics is, I think, to miss a really important political phenomenon. So that said, if you think about music as politics, music is no longer an art object for entertaining audiences. Music becomes something that we do. And Christopher Small has talked about the need to discuss musicking rather than music in order to convey this active component. That even when we listen, but especially when we participate, when we rehearse, when we perform, when we compose, when we dance to music, we're doing something. And in doing that, we may be engaged in political activity. So music as a part of political discourse, I began to study because I was interested in how philosophers often use musical metaphors at crucial points in their arguments to talk about democracy. And the musical metaphors, to give you some examples, voice of the people. Voice is musical. It's not just words. I'm also making sound here. A resonant public sphere, a harmonious society, or a dissonant one, a vibrant political leader. And what I noticed was that in thinking about music as politics, one was expanding the understanding of political communication in ways that included people who may have had access to the fora of decision making, but we're not communicating in the rational arguments, we're not writing the books, we're not engaging in the debates that had dominated the history of democracy in the Western world. Because rational argument was a form of public discourse historically associated with white middle-class men. And they had managed through the process of maintaining that notion of public discourse to exclude these other forms of communication that were being used by many other groups. The term for this is internal exclusions. It comes from Irish Young. And what Irish Young argued was that we needed to pluralize our notion of political communication. So in addition to rational argument, I'm not arguing against reason in politics, I'm arguing for more. Young said we needed to have greetings, so I said hello when I came in, which immediately established some sort of relationship with you. We also needed to consider rhetoric, and that's where Young puts music. And then we needed to hear people's stories. And what Irish Young argued was that chanting and singing for a cause was for her the most important aspect of democratic participation and collective solidarity. That was where she felt engaged and empowered as a citizen. So I started studying music and politics, looking at the music of progressive social movements, feminist and civil rights movements, and I am trained as an amateur musician, piano and voice, and so I was able to study the music as well as the lyrics. But I then discovered that there was another music, and a number of my colleagues led me to study this music by asking me, what about the other side of the political spectrum? And hate music is defined in terms of two main characteristics. It's explicitly ultra-nationalist and racist, and it's used to target historically oppressed groups for violence. Hate groups have been rising in the United States, and this is a statistic compiled from Southern Poverty Law Center data by Al Jazeera. It's showing you 2015 and 2016, and what you'll see in particular is a rise in anti-Muslim groups that has continued. And this rise in hate groups is partly a function of the challenges that globalization poses for the cultural identity and the economic security of the white West. And if you look at the longer term trends, this rise took off post 9/11, further increases with the 2008 election of President Barack Obama, and then again in 2012. And a number of issues contributing to this rise in hate groups, including Obama's agendas for immigration reform, health care, gun laws. Patriot and militia groups, not shown on this slide, have also been increasing in numbers. They tend to be higher under Democratic administrations than under Republican ones because people are more concerned about losing Second Amendment rights due to gun control legislation. We may see further change in that following the shootings in Parkland. So I thought I should study this hate music and distinguish it from hate in popular music as an extreme that could illuminate the norm. So I turned to that music for my current project, and you can see here a quote from William Pierce, former owner of Resistance Records, who talks about how white supremacist groups explicitly use music to target what they regard as vulnerable groups, and prisoners, women, and especially teenagers. And the argument is that music taps into the soul. It reaches us at a deeper level than books and speeches. Now, some recent examples. On the left here, Wade Michael Page, the Sikh temple shooter in 2012. In the middle, Anders Behring Breivik, who engaged in a mass massacre at a Socialist Labor Party camp in 2011 in Norway. And then on the right, Paul Craig Cobb, who is wearing a t-shirt for World Church of the Creator, and who brought up a lot of abandoned and foreclosed properties in Leith, North Dakota, with an attempt to found an intentional white community and host white power music festivals on his land. White power music has been around for a long time. If you want to look at the history of it, probably a good place to start is in England in the late 1970s with a split in punk music and racist skinhead scenes into Rock Against Communism on the right, headlined by the band Screwdriver and its lead singer Ian Stewart Donaldson, and then Rock Against Racism on the left, and probably the band best associated with that is The Clash, but also the Sex Pistols. Continuing, though, the story, these are the bands that I look at in my book, Trendy Fascism. And white power music is not only the racist skinhead scene coming out of one wing of punk music, it's also neo-Nazi folk music. On the right there, you have Prussian Blue, which is a neo-Nazi folk band no longer performing, but wearing their infamous Hitler smiley face t-shirts. The upper left is Screwdriver, the first explicitly political racist skinhead band. And then on the lower left, you have RAHOWA. It's an acronym for Racial Holy War. The World Church of the Creator t-shirt is appearing again there. And the lead singer is George Birdie, who I'm going to say more about in a few minutes. So how this music works, the lyrics convey a message, and there's some consistent themes across the genres. Enemies of the racial nation, origin stories and epic struggles, unemployment, corruption and coercion, both capitalist and government, legal double standards, the notion of a persecuted white race, antisocial rebellion, and some argue that this is music that's really part of a youth culture and shouldn't be taken all that seriously politically. It's just about people acting out and a stage in identity formation. I think the politics are more serious than that, but that argument is out there. And then nature worship, arguments for a racial religion, and then racial heroes are often celebrated in this music, male warriors and female breeders. The argument is that women are breeding the future citizen soldiers of the white race. In the South, particularly an emphasis on states' rights, and then the male warriors are often Confederate generals who are seen as martyrs to the race. Screwdriver had a spin-off band called the Klansmen, which had a rockabilly sound and specifically targeted audiences in the American South. It's important to recognize that the music works through its sounds as well as its lyrics, and some of the characteristics of the sounds and the rhythms, catchy tunes, simple refrains, loud, hard-hitting music, dominates, strong chord modulations, driving rhythms, and the music works on our emotions and our bodies in particular ways. If you are listening to this music, especially at a live concert, but also online, the music initially was in sort of closed, hidden spaces, private clubs, restricted festivals, but it's now readily available on the internet. You will experience changes in body temperature and increased heart rate, higher blood pressure, your face may become flushed. People are amped up on the music. And what it does is appeal to sort of primitive parts of the brain, the so-called reptile brain, the amygdala and the cerebellum and the hippocampus, where our fundamental fight instincts can be engaged. And that happens before people have a chance to really think about the music or process the lyrics in sort of higher levels of the brain in the cerebral cortex. The experience that people have, especially at live concerts, is called ecstasy, and the argument is that music is a powerful drug, so it's a reasonable analogy to make. The drugs are not required, though. The music alone can do it. And an ecstatic experience is one that has you standing outside yourself. So ekstasis, stand outside yourself. And often that experience involves a phenomenon that's called muscular bonding, where people lose their sense of individual vulnerability and of personal responsibility and become one with the crowd, and hence are willing to do things that they would not otherwise do. So again, these are the primitive fight or flight reactions that get triggered, but now as a group phenomenon. And there's often violence that follows these concerts that spills over into the streets. The music also is a really powerful memory device, and this is true of music more generally. You probably all remember learning the alphabet and counting songs, right? And it works by repeating phrases and chunking them, and then the tune can carry you over any gaps in cognitive memory. So if you forget a few letters, you can catch up later on. Well, this music also works that way with simple refrains, and it's stored again in these primitive regions of the brain on a cellular level. And so social movements can recall the set of associations that people had the last time they experienced the music and then mobilize people in the future. I should say that there is a new genre of white power music, which is called Fashwave. I'm curious, has anybody heard of it? No. It comes out of synthwave and vaporwave from the 1980s, but some trace it back even further to the futurist movement and to the development of Muzak in the 1930s. It's music of the alt-right. They are claiming it as their soundtrack. They're again saying that it expresses the soul of white supremacy, and the music is instrumental. It's electronic music, so it has less scrutiny than some of the earlier forms whose lyrics were explicitly hate-filled. But the hate associations are evident in the videos, the images, and also in the song titles. The song that really brought Fashwave initial attention in 2015, 2016 was Cyber Nazi's song, Galactic Lebensraum. And on the right-hand side there, you can see the image that is associated with that song. And then on the left side, the Trump victory meme that is associated with Fashwave music. Now, there are people who performed this music who have renounced it and who are working against their previous songs that are still out there on the internet and have made a commitment to do that for the rest of their lives. Some of these former white supremacists and specifically white power musicians have founded an organization called Life After Hate, which runs an exit program. And these are a few statements that they've made about their previous performances of white power music, and also what they think hatred, anger, and racism do and have done to them, their audiences, and their victims. Interestingly enough, some of them left the white supremacist movement through ecstatic experiences of music. The same experiences that led them into it led them out of it. So they found another genre. Some of them formed new bands. But others left because they had children and they heard their children expressing the racism that they had practiced, and they were not comfortable with that. Some of them saw the effects of the white power music scene on their friends and their family. They lost people they loved to drugs and to violence. Some of them saw reports of domestic terrorist attacks on TV and were shocked into awareness about what they had in reality gotten themselves involved in and were doing. And some of them were transformed in jail. Jail for some was the most integrated experience they had ever had. And playing on prison sports teams in particular changed their consciousness. So that is a positive development. There are others. Spotify and iTunes have decided to pull this music from their offerings. It is still, though, readily available, and not only underground, it's available on Amazon. I don't argue for censorship. I don't argue for market censorship or state censorship. I argue instead for education. I think people need to know that this music is out there and what its potential dangers are, how it works on not only our minds, but also our bodies and our emotions. And I also think that citizens in a democracy have a responsibility for the cultural politics that we create and we sustain. So I want to leave you with that thought and with the question whether the stories of these former white power musicians who have left the movement and are now working against it might be able to create some sense of empathy between poor whites and communities of color. I also want to ask when in the United States white citizens in particular are going to confront this longer and deeper history of white supremacy that has created the space for this music to arise and continue and complete the work of post-Civil War reconstruction and stand together on the side of justice. And so I will leave you with a thank you. And I skipped over the thank you slide. A thank you from the participants in some of the community programs of Life After Hate, and with the URL for their website, and with the question, are you listening? And if so, to what music, and what music would you want American citizens to hear? So thank you.